The series begins with a girl named Kang Ju-eun who's known as the most beautiful girl. Many students are really impressed by her because she not only looks beautiful but also has an ideal body. People even want her to become a model, but she turns down those offers because her dream is to become a lawyer. Out of all the guys who were interested in her, only one named Woo-sik managed to win her heart. Fast forward 15 years, Kang Ju-eun has successfully achieved her dream of becoming a lawyer. However, she struggled to maintain her weight and ended up looking a bit overweight and not as attractive as before, even though she tried to eat healthy. Unfortunately, she didn't exercise enough to balance it out. At first, everything was going well in Ju-eun's relationship with Woo-sik, but on their 15th anniversary, he unexpectedly broke up with her without giving any reason. Ju-eun had actually hoped that he would propose to her on that day. In a different part of the world, in an American city, there's a Korean guy named Kim Yong-ho who works as a trainer for professional boxers. There were rumors going around that Yong-ho, whose face was not known to the public, was in a romantic scandal with a famous artist. During this time, Yong-ho went by the name John Kim. On the other hand, Ju-eun had a close call, almost missing her flight to America, because she had a weekend plan there. After a few days of work in the US, she finally headed back to Korea. Interestingly, she found herself on the same plane as Yong-ho and his two friends. Since they were seated next to each other, one of Yong-ho's friends, Ji-young, said hi to Ju-eun and introduced himself as a well-known manager for boxers. Ji-young was so caring and even gave Ju-eun a blanket when she felt cold. Suddenly, the plane hit some turbulence, and shortly after, Ju-eun passed out. Luckily, Yong-ho had a medical background, and he came to her aid. Yong-ho was surprised because Ju-eun had taken a lot of diet pills and was wearing a tight corset, which made it hard for her to breathe. After administering an IV and medicine, Ju-eun woke up. Yong-ho even offered his seat to make her more comfortable. Ju-eun was thankful and wanted to repay Yong-ho's kindness. It turned out that Yong-ho had some people waiting for him in Korea, including someone named Mr. Min. To avoid drawing attention, Yong-ho got into an ambulance to make his arrival less noticeable. When Yong-ho arrived at the hospital, he spotted Ju-eun trying to leave in a hurry. This made him concerned and willing to assist her. Yong-ho offered her a ride since Ju-eun seemed to be in a rush and mentioned going to a friend's place. However, it turned out that Ju-eun wanted to meet Woo-sik, but what she found was Woo-sik being affectionate with another woman. At that moment, Ju-eun decided to walk out into the heavy rain, feeling like she was being followed. After running for a while and getting tired, Yong-ho approached her. Ju-eun, who had been scared at first, started to feel a bit relieved. Yong-ho explained that he meant no harm cause he just couldn't stand seeing someone in distress. However, Ju-eun insisted on going home on her own. Yong-ho ended up staying at a hotel under a friend's name to avoid being tracked. But the next day, Mr. Min found him and arranged a meeting with someone. It turned out that Yong-ho was the grandson of the founder of the Gahong Group, a medical company. He was asked by his grandmother, Mrs. Lee, to meet a girl for a potential marriage. However, after the meeting, his two friends, Ji-young and Jim-song, came to pick him up and told him to have some fun. It seemed that Yong-ho had no plans to reconnect with his family in Korea. But he couldn't escape Mr. Min's watchful eye, as he asked Yong-ho to return to a house that had been prepared by his family. Turns out, Yong-ho's return to Korea was connected to Mrs. Lee's plan to pass the company down to him. However, this idea faced opposition from Mr. Choi Nam-chol, who believed that Yong-ho was still too young and not well known by many board members. And Mr. Choi's trusted friend turned out to be Ju-eun's ex-boyfriend, Woo-sik. He had someone look into Yong-ho's background in America. Meanwhile, Ju-eun found herself in a chaotic situation at her law firm. The chairman introduced a new senior lawyer named Oh Soo-jin, who recognized Ju-eun as her old college friend. Back then, Ju-eun had been the only one who stood up for her against bullies. In the past, Soo-jin had been overweight during her college days. Later that evening, Ju-eun went to the hotel where Yong-ho was staying to get her phone and bag that she had left behind. She accidentally witnessed Woo-sik having an affair with Soo-jin at the hotel, which left her in shock and embarrassed as people noticed her. Fortunately, Yong-ho came to her aid. Ju-eun asked him to take her anywhere to gain her pride back in front of Woo-sik and Soo-jin. Yong-ho then brought Ju-eun to his hotel room to get her belongings. While there, he noticed that Ju-eun had sprained her shoulder. There, he kindly helped her with it, but some hotel guests misunderstood the situation and thought negatively. On the other hand, Soo-jin was worried that Ju-eun might misunderstand the situation, even though she and Woo-sik were simply going to have dinner. At that time, Woo-sik waited for Ju-eun because he wanted to explain what had really happened. Ju-eun couldn't believe that her own friend was the woman who had taken Woo-sik away from her. At that moment, Ju-eun didn't want to hear any explanation from Woo-sik because it seemed like he was defending Soo-jin. Back at the office, Soo-jin didn't try to clarify her relationship with Woo-sik or apologize to Ju-eun. For her, there was nothing special about her love for Woo-sik, as they had known each other since college. A little later, Ju-eun was visited by Ji-young, who wanted her help as a legal advisor for the athlete he was coaching, Jun-song. Eventually, Ju-eun agreed to handle the sponsorship and contracts for Jun-song. Meanwhile, Mr. Song-chol met with his son and asked him to stay in Korea because the business matters in America had been given to another director. The next day, when Ju-eun opened Ji-young's jacket, which had been left in the ambulance, she was surprised to find John Kim's identification card in the pocket. She met Ji-young in a hotel room to return his jacket and suspected that he was actually John Kim, as she had seen Yong-ho's ID on the jacket. At that time, they decided to pretend that John Kim was Ji-young to protect Yong-ho's true identity. Then, Ju-eun started to imagine that she could regain her previous weight by training with a famous personal trainer. Yong-ho then asked her how much weight she wanted to lose, because he would help John Kim as a translator, as John Kim wasn't fluent in Korean. Ju-eun was happy to have the support of 3 health mentors, including Yong-ho. After their workout, Yong-ho received a call from Mr. Min, who informed him that Yong-ho's house had been prepared. Yong-ho then met his father at the Gahong office to withdraw his resignation from the American office. It seemed that Yong-ho wanted to go back abroad, but Mr. Song-chol couldn't grant his request because Yong-ho's return was decided by Mrs. Lee. At that time, Yong-ho still vividly remembered his mother's accident when he was little, and since then, he had been sent to America for cancer treatment. The following day, Ju-eun's first day of training finally began. After hearing Yong-ho's suggestion, Ji-young was tasked with pushing Ju-eun to her limits right from the start with some intense training. Jun-song also gave her some really tough exercises that left her exhausted. The next day, Ji-young and Jun-song invited Ju-eun to go on a long run, which after several days of continuous training, caused her legs to cramp. Yong-ho was genuinely concerned about Ju-eun's well-being and whether this program would work, as she hadn't lost any weight so far. On the 3rd day of training, Yong-ho had to work with Ju-eun alone because Jun-song and Ji-young had an interview. However, in the middle of the session, Yong-ho received a call for a date with a girl chosen by his grandmother. At the same time, Woo-sik was at the movies with Soo-jin when he got a call from a woman who turned out to be Ju-eun's mother. He was then seen meeting Ju-eun's mother at the same restaurant where Yong-ho was. Turns out, Ju-eun's mother had been giving attention and food to Woo-sik all this time. Not wanting to continue lying to her mother, Ju-eun decided to break the news that her relationship with Woo-sik was over. Hearing that, her mother was disappointed because, at her age, Ju-eun should have been married. Late at night, Ju-eun was still practicing in the arena, which worried Yong-ho. Seeing that she had pushed herself beyond her limits, he told her to stop and insisted on arranging a driver because Ju-eun was in no condition to drive herself home. The next day, Ju-eun received an assignment to appear on a TV talk show about legal experts. But during the interview, she suddenly fainted because her tight corset was making it hard for her to breathe again. This worried Woo-sik, and he hurried to catch up with her. However, Yong-ho reached the hospital first and stayed with Ju-eun until she woke up. Finally, Yong-ho confessed that he was the real John Kim. He also promised to help Ju-eun lose weight in a healthy way. This offer had a reason because lab tests showed that she had hypothyroidism, which made it tough for her to lose weight even after a week of exercise. Ju-eun was upset to learn that they had been keeping the truth from her about John Kim. What's more, the training she had been doing wasn't for weight loss, but for athletes. She felt disappointed because she had been working hard and believed in Yong-ho. At that time, Yong-ho felt guilty too because people with hypothyroidism shouldn't be stressed or tired. He remembered being at the hospital, where Woo-sik came to visit Ju-eun and asked him to take care of her. In the end, Yong-ho was touched and wanted to help Ju-eun because she was going through many problems. Now let's talk about Soo-jin, who's feeling jealous because Woo-sik still cares about Ju-eun, even though they'd broken up. Her irritation grew when she learned that the video of Ju-eun fainting had gone viral online. From what Woo-sik said, it seemed like he was relieved because there was now another man looking out for Ju-eun. Feeling deceived, Ju-eun shared her frustration with her best friend Yeonwoo. The situation got even more complicated because Ju-eun had to cover the expenses for her sister's wedding, who had gotten a young girl pregnant. Ju-eun became suspicious and asked about the potted plants that were always in her house. The following day, Young-ho resumed training with Jun-song. Eventually, he was honest with her about his true identity, including the illness that was causing her body to swell. Ju-eun still felt unsure about going to work because her eyes were swollen, not to mention the embarrassment over the popular video. When she arrived at the office, some of her colleagues chuckled about Ju-eun fainting during the interview. Little did they know, she was in the same elevator when they were discussing it. During break time, Soo-jin met Ju-eun and asked her to address her more formally in the office, especially now that Soo-jin was her boss. A little while later, Ji-young arrived, and he expressed regret for the lie they told earlier, which was to protect Young-ho's identity. They then took Ju-eun to a cafe where Young-ho was waiting for her. There he explained why he didn't want his identity as John Kim to be revealed, mentioning that he came from a well-known family and needed to uphold their reputation. From that point on, John Kim became Ju-eun's coach and got involved in her training program. Ju-eun was determined not to quit halfway before achieving success, and now she receives the right medical treatment and takes her medication regularly. Young-ho also took her to a beauty clinic to measure her ideal body mass. This made Ju-eun feel a bit embarrassed because Young-ho was a very perfectionist person and seemed quite concerned about her body. Meanwhile, during a family dinner, it was revealed that Mr. Song-chol had another son named Young-jun from his marriage to Mrs. Hae-run. Mr. Choi, who was Hae-run's younger brother, praised Young-jun for being intelligent and always receiving scholarships to study abroad. He even mentioned that Young-jun inherited his father's personality. However, Mrs. Lee didn't seem to like this conversation much, as she was focused on her biological grandson's return and getting the position she had long wanted. The following day, Young-ho and his friends purposely came to Ju-eun's apartment very early, which surprised her. They searched through her entire house and got rid of food they considered unhealthy. Then, Young-ho started to help Ju-eun adjust her eating habits and correct her bad routines, like her sleeping patterns. He was also using advanced tools from America to manage his own condition. After a few days, Young-ho invited Ju-eun to exercise at his place. He explained the physical training she needed based on his experience as a trainer. Then she began to follow high advice, including taking her medication and eating vegetables daily. After the workout, Young-ho took her home, but he got a bit suspicious when he learned that there was a man lurking around Ju-eun's apartment. At that moment, Ju-eun had an unexpected visit from a mysterious stalker. Fortunately, Young-ho arrived just in time and incapacitated the man. They then took the stalker to the police station. From a distance, Woo-sik witnessed the incident, but he couldn't meet with Ju-eun. The police couldn't proceed with the case due to lack of evidence, and it turned out the man lived next door to Ju-eun's apartment. It turns out Ju-eun said she'd be staying in a friend's house close to the police station. However, when she arrived there, it was actually a motel she wanted to stay in. This upset Young-ho, because Ju-eun lied to him. He then invited her to stay at his house, where he prepared a room for her with a blanket and pillow. Before going to bed, Young-ho felt pain in his knee, which had been operated on a long time ago. It happened when he saved Ju-eun, and it caused his old injury to flare up. The next day, they had breakfast together, and Ju-eun shared what happened the previous night. Young-ho paid close attention to managing her diet. On the other hand, Ji-dong, at that time, noticed a beautiful girl on Ju-eun's wallpaper and thought she was a celebrity. To their surprise, the photo was actually of a young Ju-eun. Soon after, Young-ho contacted Mr. Min about his leg issue, and Mr. Min scheduled him for a checkup at a hospital outside the city. Meanwhile, Woo-sik visited a detective working on Ju-eun's stalking case and warned the man to stay away from her life. He even canceled his meeting with Soo-jin that day. He remembered his college days when Soo-jin believed Ju-eun had set up a blind date out of pity for him, leading to their breakup. At that time, Ju-eun refused to handle a case that went against her principles. One evening, Mr. Choi was having dinner with his sister and son. He seemed envious because Young-ho was going to be appointed as an executive director on the company's 61st anniversary. Mrs. Hae-run also had a son named Young-jun, who she could rely on. On that same night, Ju-eun planned to move into Young-ho's house, as they had agreed before. Young-ho took her to a jiu-jitsu training ground to be able to defend himself in case the stalker harassed him again. There was an unexpected incident that made Ju-eun feel embarrassed because she accidentally kissed Young-ho. The following day, Yong-ho left early for therapy that would last for several weeks. After completing the therapy, a doctor confirmed that he had fully recovered. A few days later, Yong-ho returned to Seoul, surprising Ju-eun, who was in the middle of her workout. There, he invited her to use a massage tool in his private room, so she wouldn't have to go to a massage parlor, which she had been worried about. With regular exercise throughout the day, along with her hypothyroid medication, Ju-eun's weight decreased significantly, and her cheeks became slimmer. They decided to have a simple celebration for her success and fulfill all her wishes in one day. At that time, Ju-eun treated them to a meal and sweet drinks. Yong-ho, who previously avoided foods with flour, had to comply with Ju-eun's request. Not only that, she prohibited him from exercising and asked him to take a nap. The next day, while at the law firm, the head lawyer scolded Ju-eun for turning down a case that Soo-jin had assigned to her. Soo-jin accused Ju-eun of dating because she was desperate to lose weight. However, Ju-eun hinted that it was Soo-jin who was trying to get back with her ex-boyfriend. On the other hand, Woo-sik received a call from the police station regarding the recent attack on a mysterious man. He didn't expect the victim to have recorded evidence of the incident. Surprisingly, Soo-jin also appeared because Woo-sik needed a lawyer's help. Soo-jin had apparently been following Woo-sik since he was at the office, concerned about his well-being. She didn't anticipate that Woo-sik would still worry about Ju-eun despite their breakup. At night, the police invited Ju-eun to the office, along with Yong-ho as a witness. Through their conversation, Yong-ho finally learned that Ju-eun and Woo-sik had been dating for 15 years. Seeing a man close to Ju-eun, Woo-sik reminded her to be cautious, fearing that Yong-ho might have ulterior motives. Wanting to resolve the case quickly, Yong-ho asked for Mr. Min's help in handling the issue. Meanwhile, Soo-jin felt excluded as Ju-eun's place in Woo-sik's heart appeared to remain strong. She remembered how Woo-sik had once come to her rescue when she was being bullied by a man. After their business at the police station, Yong-ho and Ju-eun stopped by a shop to buy drinks. In the pouring rain, they got closer, especially when Yong-ho impulsively kissed Ju-eun in a very romantic way. Since that moment, Ju-eun has had trouble sleeping because she can't stop thinking about Yong-ho. The next day, he asked her to exercise even on an empty stomach because she had eaten too much the previous day. The following day at the law firm, Ju-eun witnessed Soo-jin being verbally abused by the victim's family, who were seeking justice for their daughter, who had been assaulted by a wealthy businessman's son. The woman felt humiliated because the perpetrator had not apologized and only offered compensation. Soon after, Ju-eun comforted the woman, sharing that she had been in a similar position, recalling how her late father had faced similar mistreatment. Ju-eun returned to the law firm and talked with Soo-jin. They discussed Woo-sik, who had left Ju-eun, and turned to Soo-jin. There, Soo-jin hesitated to go deeper into the conversation because she believed that others also have the right to have what Ju-eun once had. In another place, Yong-ho meets his grandmother at a temple where she's praying for her late biological daughter. Mrs. Lee is thrilled to see her beloved grandson and expresses her sadness about Yong-ho's tough upbringing. Losing his mother at a young age and spending half of his life in the hospital for surgeries and rehabilitation. She wants Yong-ho to take over the Gahong group now that he's grown up. However, Yong-ho is uncertain about leading his grandmother's company because he wants to establish a cancer center and invest in rehabilitation. On the other hand, since Ju-eun living at Yong-ho's house, it becomes busy and warm, especially when Ji-young seems to be getting along well with Ju-eun and even exercises and dances with her. At night, Yong-ho contacts Mr. Min to see if he's willing to follow Mrs. Lee's orders. He also buys a new bag for Ju-eun for work because her old one got stained with food and smelled bad. While working, Ju-eun receives a call from Yeonu, who asks her to pick up his son from school because he's busy. At that time, Ju-eun has to invite Yong-ho and his two friends to come to the kindergarten because it's Father's Day, an important event for a child. Their presence at the kindergarten makes Min-jun very happy. Jun-song and Ji-young even put on an impressive martial arts show. That day, Ju-eun fulfills Min-jun's wishes by taking him to an entertainment venue he's been wanting to visit for a month. The next day, Ju-eun and Soo-jin had to meet a relative from the Gahong group, and Ju-eun was completely surprised to discover that Yong-ho was the executive director of the company. This revelation left Ju-eun in shock, and she asked for permission to leave the room. She recalled some of the things Yong-ho had said the previous day that hinted at his wealthy background. Ju-eun felt disappointed because Yong-ho had been lying to her all along, but his confession about her being his first love seemed genuine. Soon after, Yong-ho invited Ju-eun to have a private conversation and asked his team to wait for 10 minutes. The company's lawyer cooperation contract meeting became uncomfortable for both Yong-ho and Ju-eun. Ju-eun even declined the food banquet that the Gahong group had prepared. When he returned home, Yong-ho felt lonely because Ju-eun had left. As it turned out, Ju-eun had gone to visit her mother in her hometown. Ju-eun's mother had recently opened a fried chicken shop, and many of her friends were curious about Ju-eun's relationship status, given her young age. Then Ju-eun's mother encouraged her daughter to come home, as she didn't want her to be bothered by the gossip. When Ju-eun was about to go to bed, she received a message that Yong-ho had arrived in Daegu. Ju-eun was surprised that Yong-ho knew where her hometown was, even though they had never discussed it before. Ju-eun rushed to a famous bridge in the city and warmly hugged Yong-ho when she saw him. While driving Ju-eun back home, Yong-ho opened up about his difficult childhood, which included a serious operation and the loss of his mother. Concerned for his well-being that night, Ju-eun invited him to spend the night. During their time together, Ju-eun asked Yong-ho about his position as a director, which didn't seem to be his true passion. There he realized that he was more interested in sports than business. That night, Yong-ho felt comfortable resting his head on Ju-eun's back. Back in Seoul, Jun-song and Ji-young were actually happy that Yong-ho hadn't returned home because it meant they could enjoy whatever food they wanted. Meanwhile, Woo-sik had been investigating the identity of the new Gahong director, who appeared to have a connection to John Kim. The next day, Mr. Min gave Yong-ho a ride because he had a meeting at the Gahong company. Yong-ho was introduced to other shareholders, including his uncle, Mr. Choi. It was clear that Mr. Choi had a trusted friend who turned out to be Woo-sik. Meanwhile, Ju-eun was once again bothered by Soo-jin's questions about her relationship with Yong-ho. Soo-jin, as her boss, wanted to know if Ju-eun had a personal relationship with her client, Yong-ho. Soo-jin even seemed skeptical, thinking it was unlikely for Ju-eun to have a personal connection with someone in a high position. After finishing work, Ju-eun went to Yong-ho's house quietly. After calling him several times, she finally heard a phone ringing in a secret room near Yong-ho's bedroom. To her surprise, she found Yong-ho lying down in pain. At that time, Ju-eun wanted to call the hospital, but Yong-ho insisted on handling it himself. Despite her worries, she had to obey his orders and wait outside the room. Yong-ho then gave himself an injection to ease the pain. After a few minutes, he started feeling better. He eventually revealed that he had battled bone cancer. Even though the doctor had declared him completely cured, the pain still recurred, possibly due to psychological effects. That night, Ju-eun stayed with Yong-ho as he rested. She couldn't bear to see the man she loved in pain. On the other hand, Mrs. Lee asked her daughter-in-law to leave the house because Yong-ho was returning to serve as the executive director. She wanted to secure her finances in Yeonjun's future. Mr. Choi, on the other hand, disagreed with this decision and urged his sister to stay at the Lee family house. Not wanting to stay at Yong-ho's house for too long, Ju-eun decided to move out the following week. Yong-ho was concerned her new place. Ju-eun also requested that they keep their distance, especially since Yong-ho was under the watchful eye of many as the new director. She also planned to inform Jun-song and Ji-young about her relationship with Yong-ho. As the days passed, Ju-eun and Yong-ho enjoyed their time together as they exercised in a fun way. They had to be discreet about their closeness in front of Ji-young. Soo-jin, on the other hand, was feeling increasingly lonely due to the stress from her heavy workload. She was seen consulting a doctor to help her manage her diet. Unexpectedly, Woo-sik was waiting for her somewhere. However, their conversation left Soo-jin heartbroken because it seemed like Woo-sik wanted to end their relationship. It turned out that he couldn't forget the memories he had with Ju-eun, where she had been genuinely caring and sincere towards him. He felt guilty for choosing Soo-jin solely based on her appearance. The next day, Woo-sik met Ju-eun at a coffee shop. He asked Yong-ho for a moment to talk to Ju-eun, and Yong-ho allowed it. Even though he didn't expect Ju-eun to come back to him, Woo-sik still didn't want her to be with another man. Soo-jin saw this meeting, which made her even more jealous, as she believed it was the reason Woo-sik broke up with her. One day, Ju-eun and Yeonu had the idea of going on a camping trip. Yong-ho and his friends were very excited about spending the night together. After setting up the tent and introducing himself to Ju-eun's friends, Yeonu invited everyone to have fun and enjoy dinner. He also organized a truth-telling event in front of everyone. However, the most surprising revelation was when Young-ho confessed that he was dating Ju-eun. When they got back home, Mr. Min expressed his concerns about the investigation into John Kim's identity by Mr. Choi. Mr. Min regretted that Young-ho seemed too relaxed despite the complicated situation. To avoid any misunderstandings, Young-ho introduced Ju-eun to Mr. Min as his girlfriend and informed him that she was currently living with him. He was willing to take any risks to protect Ju-eun, even if it meant going against Mrs. Lee's plans to set him up with another girl. That night, Ju-eun decided to leave Young-ho's house, but he persuaded her to stay until the next day. Meanwhile, in another place, Woo-sik meets Soo-jin and apologizes for what he said the other day. He wants to mend their relationship, but Soo-jin is still upset and walks away. The next day, Ju-eun leaves early and says goodbye with a message. She makes breakfast for Young-ho and his friends. They seem less enthusiastic because the house feels quieter without Ju-eun around. A little later, Mr. Min arrives and discusses Young-ho's schedule for the day. They head to the Gahong company. Meanwhile, Ju-eun arrives at the law firm office. There, Soo-jin informs her about a meeting with the Gahong company scheduled for tomorrow. However, Ju-eun feels confident that she can handle it on her own. On the other hand, it seems that Mr. Choi and his supporters are planning to prevent Young-ho from taking over as the largest shareholder. Woo-sik had suggested finding a way to cooperate with Young-ho, but Mr. Choi is determined to make it difficult for him, especially after he decided to reevaluate a delayed project. After the meeting, Young-ho met Mrs. Lee. To his surprise, his grandmother was with the girl she wanted to marry him off to. Young-ho decided to be honest with the girl and told her that he couldn't continue the relationship because he had other priorities. At that moment, Mrs. Lee's attitude of ignoring her making Mrs. Hai ran sad. However, she still showed her affection by cooking Mrs. Lee's favorite food. Mrs. Hai-run later found out that her husband had been undergoing chemotherapy without telling her. Although she wouldn't interfere in company matters, she hoped he would share his health condition with her. In the evening, Ju-eun was joined by Ji-young and Jim-song, who brought lots of food. They seemed happy even without Young-ho, who was known to be very busy. Surprisingly, the rumors about Young-ho being John Kim were finally revealed. Woo-sik, upon hearing the news, was confused. The next day, the stock meeting and Young-ho's official appointment finally began. Unfortunately, Mr. Choi intentionally prevented most of the board members from attending to delay Young-ho's appointment. In the evening, news about John Kim, also known as Young-ho, started spreading on the internet. It was reported that he had a split personality when he was in America and was involved in scandals with many women. Young-ho couldn't find peace because there were numerous journalists gathered at his house. On the other hand, the situation at Mrs. Lee's residence and Young-ho's house became increasingly chaotic due to the large number of journalists. This also weighed on Mr. Song-chol's mind. After calming down, Ju-eun had to hold back her emotions when she learned that Young-ho was struggling with his illness. His condition had worsened from the stress, but he could ease the pain with medication. During this time, Ju-eun decided to reach out to Jun-song because she believed he knew Young-ho best. There, Jun-song advised Ju-eun to act normally, pretending as if nothing had happened, because Young-ho would suffer even more if he realized that the people close to him were sad. At that time, he told Ju-eun to take good care of Young-ho, whom he regarded as a father figure. Then Jun-song recalled an incident from several years ago when he first met Young-ho. At that time, he was nearly beaten to death in a fight with gangsters, but Young-ho saved him and helped change Jun-song's vengeful attitude. Young-ho also trained him to become a professional boxer. Since then, Jun-song would always remember Young-ho's kindness and guidance throughout his life. The next day, Ji-young and Jun-song visited Ju-eun's house, providing Young-ho with a sense of relief, knowing he was surrounded by people who genuinely cared for him. They spent the morning doing exercises in the nearby mountains. To distract himself from his worries, Young-ho engaged in various activities with elderly women. On that same day, while Ju-eun had to continue working, Young-ho found himself alone in the apartment. Unexpectedly, Mr. Min arrived to pick him up because Mrs. Lee and Mr. Song-chol wanted to meet with him. Mrs. Lee was comforted by seeing her granddaughter again, especially since Young-ho's scandal with a woman from America had been cleared up. However, Mrs. Lee was disappointed with Mr. Min for concealing Young-ho's close relationship with a lawyer. She insisted that Young-ho should marry a woman from a similar background to strengthen his current position. There, Mr. Song-chol advised Young-ho to remain cautious until the company's anniversary, reminding him to stay strong and prepared for any challenges. When Yongho returned to the apartment, he had a visitor, and it was Yeonu, who needed to leave his son because of work. Yongho ended up taking care of Minjun for the entire day until Ju-eun returned home from work. Despite living under the same roof, Ju-eun and Yongho were careful not to cross any boundaries in their relationship. They both wanted to ensure that Yongho could focus on resolving the issues at his company without any distractions. At the same time, Mr. Min was working to control rumors and handle those trying to undermine Yongho. Yongho made the decision to stay at Ju-eun's apartment temporarily. Meanwhile, in her office, Soo-jin expressed her suspicions to Ju-eun that Woo-sik might be involved in revealing Yongho's true identity as John Kim. However, Ju-eun still had doubts about Woo-sik's involvement. One night, Mr. Min picked up Yongho because he needed to prepare for the upcoming Gahong Company's anniversary event. However, when the day of the event arrived, Yongho was nowhere to be found, causing concern among the organizers. Soon after, Ju-eun initiated searching the dark room and eventually found Yongho, who was in pain and looking pale. It took several minutes for Yongho to regain his strength and get up. He eventually managed to climb onto the stage and greet the invited guests as a director. On the other hand, Mr. Choi appeared disappointed that his sister didn't attend the event. He had hoped that Yeongjun, who was also a descendant of Mr. Song Chol, would attend as well. However, Yeongjun had second thoughts after hearing how angry his uncle showed up. After the event, Ju-eun had to take a break because she had sprained her foot. This happened because she was running around in high heels. Then Ji-dong and Jun-song helped her get home without her realizing. When they arrived at the apartment, Ju-eun's mother had prepared a lot of delicious fatty dishes that they couldn't resist eating. At that time, Ju-eun's mother still doesn't know that her daughter and Woo-sik have broken up, because Ju-eun is keeping it a secret. Soo-jin, on the other hand, had a near-fainting episode in a parking lot due to not eating properly for several days. Only Woo-sik cared enough to help her and take her home. After this incident, their relationship improved. Soo-jin admitted that she wasn't a sincere friend because she had once tried to steal her friend's boyfriend. The next day, Yongho started his new job. He advised Jun-song not to train too hard before his match as it would only make him tired. Meanwhile, Ju-eun went to work despite her ankle still hurting. At the office, Yongho explained why he had to delay Mr. Choi's project cause he suspected there was something weird. During their break, Yongho visited Ju-eun's law firm because he wanted to take her to the hospital for a health checkup. This made Ju-eun nervous because she had been avoiding a blood test. All this time, Ju-eun had worked hard and achieved her ideal body weight. Then the lab results showed that her hypothyroidism was improving, and she no longer needed medication. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hae-run received some money to cover her living expenses after cutting ties with Mrs. Lee's family. It seemed that there was an agreement made before the marriage that prevented Mrs. Lee from fully embracing her as a daughter-in-law. That evening, Mrs. Hae-run was feeling awful because she couldn't get in touch with her son. Several hours later, she received a call from the hospital, informing her that Yeongjun had overdosed and was in a critical condition. This incident angered Mr. Choi, who blamed Mr. Song Chol for not caring about Yeongjun and said that Mrs. Hae-run's sacrifices had been in vain. In the heat of the moment, Mr. Choi even contemplated harming Young-ho to ensure his sister and Yeongjun could inherit the family's wealth. At that time, Mr. Min was aware of this plan and wanted to find out Young-ho's whereabouts to protect him from potential harm. On the other hand, Young-ho suddenly thought of Jun-song and decided to follow him. Unbeknownst to Mr. Choi, Young-ho's car had been borrowed by Jun-song. When Mr. Choi discovered the car, he tried to harm the driver by repeatedly hitting the vehicle. Fortunately, Young-ho managed to avoid the attack, but he didn't notice a large truck in front of him until it was too late, resulting in an accident. Turns out Mrs. Hae-run also knew her brother was capable of such reckless actions, and she got involved in the series of accidents as well. Mr. Choi was surprised to learn that his sister had been in an accident while he himself was unharmed. Young-ho suffered the most severe injuries in the accident, and they were all rushed to the hospital. This reminded Mr. Song Chol of how Young-ho had ended up in the hospital as a child, repeating the painful experience. The following day there was no news from Young-ho, which greatly concerned Ju-eun because neither of her two friends' phones were active. She visited Soo-jin, who hadn't been to work for 2 days, and despite her own troubled heart, she showed care by making breakfast. Soo-jin finally explained why she had such a strong dislike for Ju-eun, which coming from a misunderstanding during a blind date in college. After apologizing to each other, Ju-eun and Soo-jin decided to put the past behind them and become friends again. They'd also let go of Oh-sik, who had chosen Soo-jin, and wished for their relationship to flourish. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Mr. Choi felt guilty seeing his younger sister become a victim too. He visited Yeonjun, who was now conscious, and learned that his drastic actions were driven by a desire to avoid causing conflicts over inheritance, this making him reflect on his own greed. When Yongho, who had a broken arm and leg, was seen by Mr. Song Chol, he couldn't stay quiet. It looked like he was thinking about something regarding Mr. Choi. On the other hand, Ji-ong and Jun Song were trying not to cry when they visited Yongho. Jun Song said sorry, because Yongho had risked his life to protect him. Yongho asked them to keep it a secret from Ju-eun because he didn't want her to worry. When they got home, Ju-eun looked really worried because they hadn't heard from Yongho for 2 days. She was shocked when she found out about his accident, but she couldn't see him because there were bodyguards outside his treatment room. Yongho could only move his finger to write a message asking Ju-eun to be patient and follow Mr. Min's orders. After a visit from Mrs. Lee, Hae-run is ready to accept whatever happens, even if she can't be a part of Mrs. Lee's family. She asked Mr. Choi to stop being hostile, because having Yeonjun healthy was enough for him. He also asked Mr. Choi to stop hurting Yongho. The next day, Soo-jin, who worked as a lawyer for Gahong Company, helped the two parties make up and avoid going to court. Oh-sik also realized he had made a mistake by following Mr. Choi down the wrong path. Now, Oh-sik and Soo-jin can be together without feeling guilty towards Ju-eun. As for Mr. Choi, after thinking it over, decided to quit his job at Gahong Company. Long story short, Ju-eun waited for news from Yongho for months, staying true to his advice of staying active and living healthily. But sometimes, she couldn't help but feel sad when she missed her lover. Meanwhile, Yongho intentionally didn't communicate with Ju-eun, even though he thought about her every day. He kept himself busy while in the hospital, just like he used to do when he believed in bad luck. At his son's request, his son finally left Seoul. He couldn't visit Yongho and left a note saying sorry for not being able to take care of his dad as Yongho wished. Yongho found comfort in a book Ju-eun gave him, which helped him fight off loneliness by reminding him of their time together. Months passed, and Yongho was moved to an American hospital for rehab. The doctor was not very hopeful about Yongho's ability to walk soon, given his decreased muscle function and serious lower body injuries. They could only hope for a miracle. During his time in America, Yongho didn't tell Ju-eun because he didn't want to distract her from her career, even though Ju-eun was the one sending him messages every day. Day by day, Yongho made progress. His leg muscles were trained with professional equipment until he could walk again. He was determined to approach and run towards Ju-eun once he returned to Korea. His joy was even greater because Ji-ong and Jun Song joined him in America, bringing news of Jun Song's victory. After waiting for a year, Yongho was finally allowed to return to Korea, and Mr. Min picked him up at the airport. He never expected Yongho to recover so well. At that time, Yongho had a plan to surprise Ju-eun, so he waited in front of her office. When Ju-eun saw him, she couldn't hold back her tears of joy. She was amazed to see the man she loved standing there. Not wanting to be apart, she even brought Yongho to her office to get some files. Later, she took him home while she worked on an important report. Ju-eun felt incredibly grateful because the best gift of her life had come true. She shared the happy news of Yongho's return with Yeonu. Yongho's family was overjoyed to have him back, and he apologized for making them worry. On the other hand, Oh-sik and Soo-jin's relationship was becoming even more romantic. They had dinner, and during that time, Oh-sik proposed to her. One night, on Yongho's birthday, Ju-eun and her friends organized a celebration. It was a night filled with happiness, and even though they weren't related by blood, they all loved each other dearly. The next day, Ju-eun received news that her mother was coming to Seoul. Her mom wanted to talk about Ju-eun's past love story, which didn't have a happy ending. Even though many of Ju-eun's friends in her hometown already have kids, she's still keeping it a secret if she's dating someone new. Afterward, she had to prepare for a meeting with Soo-jin about a client who was facing harassment. Thanks to their teamwork, the victim got justice because they were going to take legal action against the person responsible. Ju-eun was happy because now Soo-jin and Oh-sik were taking their relationship more seriously. Soo-jin also congratulated her because Yongho had returned. At that time, Ju-eun noticed that Soo-jin hadn't been feeling well and looked pale recently. She hoped Soo-jin wasn't on a strict diet that might harm her health. Oh-sik suspected something was wrong, and secretly followed Soo-jin when she went to the hospital. His worries grew when he saw Soo-jin visiting a gynecologist. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee learned about Hae-run and her son's lives. Despite her wealth, Hae-run lived in the suburbs and volunteered. She didn't expect that Young-jun would join a military service program. It seemed that Mrs. Lee was also looking into Ju-eun's background because she was close to her grandson. On the other hand, after work, Ji-young and Jun-song were already at Ju-eun's apartment, and they were seen having a good time with Ju-eun's mom by playing games. Surprisingly, Young-ho had the courage to meet Ju-eun's mom that evening. He introduced himself as Ju-eun's boyfriend, bringing a bouquet of flowers with him. There, Jun-song tried to convince Ju-eun's mom that Young-ho is a good man. Eventually, she gave Young-ho permission to date her daughter. Later that evening, Woo-sik visited Soo-jin, who wasn't feeling well. At first, Woo-sik thought Soo-jin was undergoing a program to have kids, assuming they would get married soon. However, for some reason, Soo-jin took off the ring Woo-sik gave her. She even mentioned that she wasn't ready for marriage and kids because it might affect her career. During that conversation, Soo-jin asked Woo-sik to leave her alone. Behind Soo-jin's seemingly perfect life, she had to face the harsh reality of an illness that made it difficult for her to become pregnant, partly caused by diet pills and not getting enough nutrition. The dream of having children was becoming more challenging, so she wanted to distance herself from Woo-sik for both of their happiness. On the other hand, Young-ho and Ju-eun were feeling very happy that night. They had plans to go on a trip the next day. At that time, Ju-eun thought Young-ho would take her on a vacation, but he surprised her by taking her to a temple to pay respects to his late mother. During that time, she received a message from Mrs. Lee, who invited her to meet the next night, but she kept it a secret from Young-ho. Afterward, they went on a date and visited various fun places. During the outing, Young-ho proposed to Ju-eun using a ring he had hidden in the scarf he had given her. Ju-eun shared the exciting news with Yeonu, telling him about Young-ho's proposal. She also asked Yeonu for advice on how to handle her meeting with Mrs. Lee. Yeonu lent Ju-eun some nice clothes to make her look elegant. Ju-eun wanted to be prepared in case Mrs. Lee used her wealth and influence to oppose her relationship with Young-ho. The next day, Ju-eun tried to calm her nerves as she met Mrs. Lee. She even showed the results of a recent health check, which confirmed that she was in good health, despite her battle with hypothyroidism several months ago. There, Ju-eun made it clear that she would stand by Young-ho's side, even if Mrs. Lee disagreed. Surprisingly, Mrs. Lee approved of their relationship after witnessing Ju-eun's sincerity during Young-ho's accident last year. After his time as the director of Gahong, Young-ho now had great confidence in Woo-sik to establish a medical rehabilitation center in Seoul. He believed that Woo-sik was the right person for the job, because he had gone through a similar experience when Woo-sik needed rehabilitation after a swimming injury. Young-ho also reached out to Mr. Choi to return to the office and become a dependable partner in building the company. During a family gathering, Ju-eun's presence managed to warm Mrs. Lee's heart, bringing life to the once quiet house. For the first time, Young-ho saw his grandmother very happy and laughing out loud. In the near future, Young-ho and Ju-eun are going to get married. He also learned about his father's illness and visited Mr. Song-chol while he was having chemotherapy at the hospital. From now on, Young-ho will help his dad run the company responsibly. He also fixed his dad's relationship with Mrs. Hae-run, which had been strained. At that time, Mr. Song-chol asked Young-jun to attend medical school because he would feel more at ease being cared for by his own son. On the other hand, Soo-jin also found happiness. Even though they knew it might be challenging to have children, Woo-sik accepted it and promised to support Soo-jin in her recovery. Although they had just started their romantic relationship, he already knew that Soo-jin had loved him since college. Meanwhile, 3 months after marrying Young-ho, Ju-eun shared the joyful news of her twin pregnancy. The series ends. The moral lesson from this series is if you want a successful diet, just date your personal trainer. You might end up with a healthier life and twin babies as a bonus.